Edward Weston stands alone among the photographers who have influenced the art of the 20th century. Even though he worked in relative isolation, his life touched many people. He was an open person who would welcome friends into his confidence as they listened to him talk about his travels, his desire to live simply, and most importantly, his photography. He had a passionate commitment to a photographic style that revealed the intrinsic beauty of his subjects, no matter how commonplace they were.
Edward Weston, one of America's great photographers, had a long career and lived most of his life in California and is well noted for his many, many photographs of the West Coast and the area around Carmel, California, and particularly the beautiful Point Lobos, which is now a state reserve. But in 1932, he made a trip with two friends, Sonia Noskofiev-Kowiak, who lived with him, and a young photographer, Willard Van Dyke. Willard wanted to take lessons with Weston and to be his student, and Weston laughed and said, "You don't need my help." And this was a very open, wonderful person, was Edward Weston, and if he liked you, he couldn't do enough to help you. Well, it was decided that they would accept the invitation to come to Taos, and extended to them by Mabel Dodge Lujan for a 2-week stay. And Edward was just overjoyed with what he saw. But what he wrote about New Mexico is to me, very, very moving, because here he discovered the landscape. He hadn't seen the kind of clouds in California that we have here. He made the statement that in New Mexico, heaven and earth are one.
July 7th, 1933. We have returned from New Mexico, and I feel the time and expense well spent. Besides the visual memories brought back from a magnificent country, I have some fine new work, landscapes with gorgeous heavens. I was continuously reminded of old Mexico, details of various pueblos, the old Church of Laguna, the perfectly formed and functional ovens, again, equally perfect walls of adobe, but mostly open landscape.
While we stayed with the Knees in New Mexico in '37, we made several trips with Ernie around the territory. We went up to Aspen Valley. But the thing that really made Edward happy was that it started snowing one night, and when we woke up, the whole landscape was all decorated. And he hadn't really photographed in snow since boyhood, and he dashed out with his camera and started photographing everything in sight. When we were leaving New Mexico, we stayed with a painter outside of Albuquerque in a 150-year-old adobe, which was a marvelous building with all the rooms opening onto a courtyard, but it was a rather chilly night, and next day, while Edward was prowling around doing crumbly walls, and I decided to take a sunbath in the patio. And when he came and found me doing it, of course, he made some nudes, which turned out to be the only nudes on the Guggenheim trip. And that was about New Year's Day of 1938.
Many people think that Weston's most perfect nudes are the ones he made one day on the dunes at Oceano with Caris Wilson posing. One of these prints, Weston sent to his great friend Charles Sheeler, the photographer who lived in Connecticut. And Sheeler wrote back, "If there is a more beautiful photograph of the human figure anywhere, I haven't seen it. One associates it with the quality of drawing that Ingres set forth in the Odalisque."
Edward had made a great series of 4x5 nudes beginning in 1933 and running through 1934 and the beginning of 35. And it was a very, very productive period for him. And I happened to meet him in the middle of it and began to pose for him, which was a very enjoyable activity because there was no posing to it. You just did what you felt like doing and moved around, and when he wanted you to hold still, he'd say to.
But with reference to his nudes, the comparison to his early nudes versus his later nudes, it's interesting to note, though, that some of his earlier ones, like, and the earliest photographs, like Margaret Mather against the barn, that is one of his most popular photographs today. People just really want to buy that, and it's interesting, those images, and even his early 1N, which is the earliest nude he ever did, is very much sought after. And it's soft focus, it's lovely, it's a very lovely nude. And then, of course, when he got into close-ups in the 30s, actually he did before that, he did his early nudes in Mexico of Tina on the Azotea, and these nudes are critically sharp and not like those earlier nudes of Margaret Mather on the beach and so forth. I don't know, there are two periods in his life, a man changes, and he changed. When he went to Mexico, he changed. He went into sharp focus, got away from the pictorial aspect of everything, and so it's just the evolution of the man.
In 1923, Weston began a major change in his life when he set sail for Mexico with his friend Tina Modotti. There he experienced a highly charged social environment filled with the artists of the surging Mexican Renaissance, including Diego Rivera and Siqueiros, who were highly supportive of Weston's work. These 3 years of photographing were charged with a growing self-confidence and refinement of his individual style.
Oh, I was a boy, I turned 13 in Mexico, and Dad let me use the camera, and in fact, with the ship going down, I started using the Graflex, handheld, but I fell in love with the image immediately in Mexico City, on the tripod, looking through the finder, and yet I was influenced by his friends, and traveling, meeting Diego Rivera, and especially Orozco. Friends of mine, I was just a young teenage kid, but he left me alone to make it or break it. He didn't try to influence me, but he did subtly. Just his overwhelming personality. He was a small man, but we were more like brothers. We were very close. And I loved his work. He loved mine. And I was never envious. I did envy his big camera. I was aware of the potential, but I couldn't afford it. So eventually Mother bought me one. It cost $25, an old Corona View.
My mother had a tremendous importance in my father's life. She was a wonderful woman. She was a wonderful person. After all, she supported the kids, she took care of them, sent him money with his mistresses down there in Mexico, and we other women like say, oh, who is Flora? She was nothing. She had a hell of important things. My father just couldn't live with her.
But life began in Mexico for me. I mean, aesthetically and photographically. And the people that around him, like Charlot, Siqueiros, were tremendous figures. They were all young then, but I'm sure things rubbed off down there. I'm still a little Mexican in my heart.
We were living in Santa Monica Canyon during the Depression, 1935 and 36. And trying this and that new idea for how to make some money. And one of them Edward came up with was the Print of the Month Club. I think the Book of the Month Club had just gotten into full production and sounded like a good model. And Edward got out a handout saying how much money people would save if they only paid $10 for a print and got 12 of them in the course of a year, and they'd practically be rich buying Westons.
The need for money and for time to do his work led to Weston's application for a Guggenheim Fellowship in 1936. Edward had zipped out a 4-line project for the application, which simply stated that he wanted to continue making a series of photographs of the West, as he'd been doing since 1929, and it might include anything from a cloud to an old shoe. The $2,000 grant award, plus a magazine contract to produce a series of photographs and commentary, permitted 2 years of frugal living and of liberated photographing. Karras, his writing partner and driver through the travels, now became even more involved in every aspect of his life.
The Guggenheim application was not only the entrance of the money into our lives that we'd been looking for, but also my feeling, well, I can do this after all. And a few years later, when George Allen of Cameracraft, wanted some articles from Edward. Edward said, well, you know, I'm busy photographing, but if Karras wants to write them, fine. So that's how it went. I wrote them.
Edward Weston's career flourished because of the concentrated time he could commit to photography on the Guggenheim trips. His circle of friends also grew as he met people important to the art of photography, such as Ansel Adams and Willard Van Dyke, among the founders of Group F-64, and Nancy and Beaumont Newhall, photographers and young historians of photography.
Yes, my first visit to California was in 1940. I was then working at the Museum of Modern Art, and Nancy, my first wife, and I decided that we would go west on our vacation, and the first person that we met in California was Ansel Adams, who had already become friends. He'd come and visited New York City, and we took him through the Museum of Modern Art, and he invited us to be sure and come and say hello to him when we were in California.